Hello class, I have decided to record a short little video walking through some of the things that I think are important for you to take a look at as you begin this week's final project work. So for this week, your work for the final project is to begin to profile your data with basic descriptive statistics, graphs, and charts. One of the questions it asks is do you see any outliers? How should they be addressed? And if there's any data that's missing. The missing data part, that might not be something that you can really answer right now as we're just beginning through the whole process. So for the requirements for this assignment, you will need to create some basic descriptive statistic graphs and charts. And then kind of identify how you think these might be useful in your process. You need to answer the questions that I've outlined. And the assignment is worth 20 points. I want you to upload it as a Word document. So any tables, graphs, charts, anything, outputs that you create in your Excel data file, please don't upload your Excel data file. It makes it really difficult for me to tell what you're looking at. What I'd like you to do is copy and paste it into a Word document and then label it. Tell me what you're looking at. Tell me what you've created. And in the instructions, it tells you please do not upload the Excel file. So here you should see the data set that you're provided for the final project. That data set is located under course content, and it is labeled Final Project Due Week 16 Group 1 Data. This is the Excel file that we'll be using specifically for the final project. So a couple of things I want to talk about first before we get started doing any manipulations is that you'll notice across the top is your labels. The first column, which is A, it's identified or labeled as LinkNum, L-I-N-K-N-U-M. That's just basically numbered the patients that are in the data set. And if we go down to the, all the way to the bottom corner, if you'll see, we have 387 patients in the whole data set. That's the whole data set. We have 387 patients. Okay, so we're going to go back to the top, and we're going to notice that we have some labels up here. We have age. We've already talked a little bit about the coded variables that we have in our data sets. The coded variables in this data set follow the same format that you have been given the descriptive or the data dictionary for those. So we know that the age column, it's labeled, I think, 1 to 8 maybe. And those are age ranges. If you pull up the data dictionary, let's see if I can get this to pull up real quick. Move it over here so you can see it. The data dictionary, you notice the age is a range, not the actual age of the patient. So if that position is a 1, it means that that patient is less than 25 years of age. If it is a 2, it's going to be 25 to 44 years. 3 is 45 to 64, and so on. And that's going to be something that's extremely important to know later on as you're working on your work for the final project. And then, of course, we've talked about the sex or the gender as well. 1 is male, 2 is female. And then in D, this is going to be a really important field right now for us. If you'll notice, there are 3 providers in your data set: provider A, provider B, and C. They're just they're not identified in order. But there's provider A, B, and C. For the final project, you will choose one provider to focus your report on. Now, you can be making comparisons to the other providers in your data set, so you'll still use that data, but you're going to identify one provider as your own. And then we have, in column E, we have length of stay. Then we have an F, amount reimbursed. In G, we have total accommodations charge. H, we have total department charge. I, we have total charge. J, we have number of diagnosis codes. K, we have number of procedure codes. Again, we're looking at a coded variable for L and M. We're looking at the admission source, so where that patient was admitted from. Again, that information, how to read those variables comes from our data dictionary. And here's our admission source variables. And then we have our discharge destination as well. And it tells us where those patients are. Okay, so now and like I said, I'm going to try to make this quick, and I'm going to show you a couple of things, and then I'm going to let you play with it. Really, for this assignment, I want you guys to take the data set and begin to play with it. So copying and pasting some different things. So for instance, what I would start with is creating a pivot table. And we're going to go to a new worksheet, but we want it to include all the information in our data set. And then let's say we want, I got to play with this a little bit to remember. We want to see how many patients are in each provider set. So we're looking at patients, and it automatically sums this information. And if you look over here to the right, the values, it sums it. If you click on that and the value field setting, we want it to count it. We just want to know, we did this in our last lab, we just want to know the number of patients that's in each of that provider set. That's going to give us an idea of how our patients are spread out between providers. So that might be a good descriptive statistic to do for your assignment. So now let's go back to our sheet 1. Oh, another thing that would be good to look at too, because there's a couple of things that are going to be extremely important as we begin doing this, is to look at our providers and to look at how the DRG code. I'm going to remove. Okay, so we see our DRG codes in the set. We have 286 and 287. We see that we have 66 patients here, and we have 321 patients there. So that tells us how that data set is spread between those two DRG codes. So the next thing I might want to look at is I might want to do some filtering of information, and I just want to look at provider A. And what I want to do here is I want to do some further investigation on my provider A. So one of the first things I would suggest to you guys to do is to take each provider and create a new sheet for them. So see, I took all the provider A data and I copied it into a different sheet. And we're going to go back, and I'm going to do a little bit more. I'm going to go to provider B, and I'm going to go to another sheet, and I'm going to paste that information. So now I'm going to label these. Rename. and select provider B. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to copy all of this information into a new sheet for provider B. Well, dang. Okay, so here is my provider B. And then I'm going to do one more. I'm going to look at provider C. And I'm going to rename this. The reason why I suggest going ahead and renaming your sheets as you're copying and pasting information, because you're going to be working back and forth with your whole sheet, your whole data set, and your other providers, and it's much easier if you have the information separated out. So the next thing I might want to do is take a look at, say, length of stay. So one of the things you might want to do is look at some descriptive statistics for your length of stay. And remember, we can use our nifty little data analysis tool pack to do our descriptive statistics. And it's going to ask us for our input range. And I want to look at length of stay. And I'm going to open that back up. I'm going to click labels in the first row because I included my label. And an output range, I'm going to decide where I want that to come out at, which is right here. And I want summary statistics, confidence level. I want the largest and the smallest value, and I'm going to click OK. And you're going to want to open that up just a little bit so you can read all of your labels and what they mean. So here's our descriptive statistics for our length of stay. Our average length of stay is 3.48, and you can round these, I would suggest. To maybe 2 places after the decimal point. So this tells us what our highest value is and what our lowest value is. We can also sort and filter this information also. If we want to sort it, it's gonna take us from the smallest length of stay to the largest length of stay. And I think one of your questions this week for the final project is there any outliers? So an outlier is something that is much larger or smaller than the average. So if you'll notice, really our largest value for provider C is not that much larger. We go from 9, 10, 12, 12, and 14. But I think we'll find in one of these providers that maybe we have a really long length of stay. Yeah, see, so this would be a patient that we might decide to remove from our data set. And the reason why we might decide that is because that length of stay is much larger than the one before. So we've got 15 days here and 42 days here. So that information might skew the data and any tests that we perform. And if you'll also notice, we've got some zeros in the amount reimbursed. those might be something else that we need to, in that data cleanup, we might want to remove those patients out of our data set because there's probably something wrong with that, with the claim that was submitted, or we weren't reimbursed anything for some reason. So that might, again, skew that data if there is something wrong with that claim. And again, we can do the same descriptive statistics. And we're going to do all of this length of stay. I might not include that 42. And we want this, sure, right there. And again, we want all the same things. And again, that gives us a little bit of information here. It gives us our average, length of stay, it tells us how many patients, the count, the number of patients that are in this data set. It tells us what our largest value is and what our smallest value is. So that's a few descriptive statistics. The other thing that you might want to do, I think another thing it suggests that you do on the homework assignment is to also create, we've created a table using the pivot table. You can kind of play around with that to see maybe how many DRGs are in your data set. There's 2 DRGs, but how many patients per your set? And then what else does it ask? For some graphs or some graphs I think it asks for as well. So like we did in the cancer registry assignment where we created some bar, column, and pie charts. You can also create some of that with this data set. Again, play with the data set and just there's not going to be necessarily a right and wrong answer to this assignment. I just want to see that you're beginning to look at the provider, at the data set as a whole and each individual provider within your data set. The other thing you're going to want to do as you begin looking at this data set is you're going to want to separate it by DRG as well. So say we decide that we want to use provider C. We know that we have 2 DRGs in our data set. So maybe we want to sort and filter that information. And again, we're going to want to copy and paste this to a new worksheet. And we're going to say, we're going to rename it Provider C DRG 286. And then we're going to go back here and we're going to select 287 and we are going to copy it. Paste it. We're going to rename it. And then we can look specifically at length of stay for each DRG because we know the DRG code. Last week you should have identified what your DRG codes mean. So what that code actually stands for, and it may stand for a diagnosis with complication and comorbidity and without complication and comorbidity. And we know those patients that have complications and comorbidities are probably going to have a longer length of stay. They're going to have more charges. The reimbursements should probably be a little higher. So there's definitely a reason why you're splitting those 2 DRGs up. When you go to the HCUP website, you're going to look up information by DRG code. So the only way you can make an accurate comparison is if you're sorting and filtering that information out in your provider set. So start looking at the data set as a whole, separating it out into individual providers. Once you separate it out into individual providers, you're going to separate each provider by DRG code, and then you can start doing some of those descriptive statistics. You can do descriptive statistics on the non-coded variables, so length of stay, the amount reimbursed, total accommodations charge, total department charge, total charge. Those are things that you can do descriptive statistics on, and it's going to give you some meaningful information. The other thing you could do is do some pivot tables and look at gender. How does your data set spread between males and females? And again, you can create a graph, a visual graph outlining that information using a pie chart, a column chart, a bar chart, whichever. You might also create a chart or a graph that identifies the number of diagnosis codes. So out of your patients with the DRG 287, how many of those patients, the number of diagnosis codes they have, or procedure codes. You can do a pivot table and identify admission source, how many patients were admitted per the admission source, or how many patients were discharged per the discharge destination. Those are some examples of some of the things you would do for the assignment for this week. I'm not really concerned about you focusing on a specific provider. If you choose to focus on a specific provider this week, that's perfectly fine. But what you need to realize is that may be something that you need to go back and visit in the future after you have a better idea of what your plan is for your final project. Remember, look at those extreme outliers. Do you see any amounts that are extremely small compared to the group or extremely large? You can do that by doing your sorting from A to Z, smallest to largest. And then utilize the sort and filter. Utilize the data analysis tool pack and the descriptive statistics. And utilize pivot tables and create charts, and then follow those up with some graphs as well. Those are just some suggestions for what to do for the assignment this week. If you get stuck and need some help, be sure to let me know.